Oh, hello, friends. Oh, I forgot my mouse pad. You have to have your mouse pad when you do a wash. Mouse pad. They should make a special quiet mouse pad. Mice pads, mouse pads, pads of mice. Uh, uh, Anywho, hi everyone. This is the vamping part. This is the part where we vamp and no one can say anything. And everyone's joining the webinar. And then we'll talk to our friends. I hope everyone's well. Just making small talk here. It's going to be a blizzard. It's big news here in Minnesota. So that's fun. Okay. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. It looks like everyone has made their way into the old webinar down at the webinar ranch. So thanks everyone for joining. And tonight we are going to Seville in Spain, or should I say Sevilla. I was going back and forth, and I'll probably just use both of them interchangeably. I do think it's funny that like there are some cities where, as an American traveling in Europe, it's like sort of okay for you to use the sort of native language version of the name. Like if someone comes back from Spain and they say, "Oh, I was in Sevilla," people are like, "Oh yeah, sure, of course I know what that is." But if someone comes back from Italy and says, "I was in Firenze," everyone will be like, "You're really pretentious." And so I think it's interesting. I don't know quite what makes that that distinction between the sort of pretentious, Barcelona. I was in Barcelona, or Sevilla. But anyways, I'll use both interchangeably. Where is Sevilla? I'll stop rambling. Sevilla is in Spain. It is in very southern Spain, down towards the sort of the tip of the Iberian Peninsula. And relatively close to the border with Portugal as well. If you were doing a driving tour of the Iberian Peninsula, it's a great stop along a sort of circuitous route through Portugal and Spain. We'll talk more about how to get there and what else you might do in the area as we get into the presentation. The city itself, here's a sort of snapshot view of the sort of heart of the city. And you'll probably sort of guess right away that it was a Roman city at one point, and sort of the sort of ring structure of the roads and all of that are a pretty good indication that this is a city with a lot of history. It is a city set along the Guadalquivir, river, the river that runs along the city, which, as a fun fact, is the largest navigable river in Spain, and plays a lot of role in its history, especially in these sort of earlier parts of its history that we'll touch on a little bit more here. It's a sort of mid-sized city. It's about 600,000 people. So it's a sort of manageable city. It's not massive and overwhelming, but still sort of big enough that it's going to have more than enough for you to do, whether it's on a sort of long weekend stay as part of a bigger trip in Europe, or even if you wanted to make it your home base for an extended visit in that part of Spain. We were just there for a conference, and it was sort of extended by a couple of days just to explore the city a little bit, and just really had a fantastic time. And I think it made me realize that I really like Spain. I just don't like Madrid or Barcelona. Not that they're bad cities and they have a lot going for them, but they're not cities that I sort of have fallen in love with. I've been to both multiple times, and sort of have a take it or leave it attitude. Whereas in Seville, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get back here. This place is fantastic. And that's why I wanted to share it with you all this month, because I think you should put it on your list as you're putting together your plans and thinking about places to go in the depths of winter. So our itinerary for tonight, as per every week, first off, we're going to talk about why you're going to love Seville. I'll talk about what you're going to do. We're going to talk about a little bit of logistics, and then we'll have a chance for some questions and answers, or at least the question part. And that'll be towards the end. If questions come up as I'm going through the presentation tonight, just click the little button in your Zoom toolbar that says Q&A and just type stuff in. Throw things in there as they come to you, and I'll look at them at the end. So yeah, onward. Why are you going to love Seville? Well, first off, it is sort of a pretty unique destination, especially if, like most Americans, you know, if you've been to Europe, maybe you've been to Paris, parts of Italy, maybe you've been to Germany or the UK. The look of Seville is going to really shock you because it doesn't look like any of those places. And we're going to talk about some of the history of why you end up with architecture and artwork like this, owing to the sort of Moorish influences and other sort of cultural influences that really didn't make their way outside of the Iberian Peninsula. But it's both familiar as a European city and also really different. And that sort of blend of different styles, I think, is just very attractive. As I sort of said in the introduction, it's also a very manageable, very chill city, very walkable. The whole city from top to bottom in terms of the area you'd be walking and exploring as a tourist is like 1.5 miles. And from east to west is even less than that. So it's very easy to sort of just get around on foot and explore back lanes. And it has a great relaxed sort of Southern European vibe, which is long dinners, evening strolls, enjoying the cooler parts of the day and just taking things easy, taking things slow. And yeah, very just relaxing, charming sort of place. And finally, no big surprise here, but food's amazing. I think Spanish food is one of the more underrated cuisines in general, at least in the United States, where we have great French food and great Italian food. And it's more rare to find really awesome Spanish options, and the diversity of food in Spain is outstanding. And especially as you get into southern Spain, where you have access to just amazing seafood and fish coming in off of both the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. You have all these North African influences in the cuisine. The food's just fantastic, and we'll talk about some of the different ways to access that food as we get through this talk. But that was sort of one of the highlights for sure. It's also, I don't have a slide here, but I would say that Sevilla in particular was shockingly affordable. So we were able to, eat amazing food really, really cheap, which is an extra thing going for it. So what are you going to do on your trip in Sevilla? Well, first off, I say this in most of these talks, but this one in particular, you're really going to benefit from either doing a little bit of history review in advance, or really planning a guided tour, or worst case, which is still a pretty good option, using one of the like Rick Steves audio guides or something to build some familiarity with the history of the city. Because I think if you're just walking around the city without any of that context, it's going to be a little confusing. I was certainly confused a number of times trying to piece together why different structures looked the way they did, or why a massive building was in the middle of a park the way it was, or whatever. I'll give you a quick real crash course just to get you from sort of 300 BCE up to the present day, because it's sort of important to understand the rest of the city. So city foundations go way, way back, but the Romans were there from around 300 BCE for about 600 years. And this is a time when the Romans were super active in the Iberian Peninsula militarily. And so this is when, if you've read about Hannibal coming from Tunisia across with his elephants and marching on Rome, he sails across, lands in Spain, and is fighting sort of Romans from Spain onward. And so the Romans are very active militarily in the Iberian Peninsula, sort of trying to fight off those invaders. And what was Hispalis at the time, modern day Sevilla, was a major city for the Romans in that whole story. And because it's on the only major navigable region, it also was an inland port. And so it was a center of trade in the ancient world for the Romans, trading with other parts of the Mediterranean and elsewhere. So you got 600 years of Romans. The Vandals come in. They're there for like 400 years or something. And then the Moors come across from North Africa around 700 AD. And we've talked about the Moors before when talking about cities like Lisbon, obviously huge Moorish influences all throughout the Iberian Peninsula. We also talked about how sort of the Moorish power had this very rapid ascendancy and then a very slow decline as they were sort of, beaten back from different parts of land throughout the peninsula. Their sort of overall landmass shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, but the Moors retained power in Sevilla and other parts of that southern Spain for about 500 years. And so obviously that's where we get a lot of the Moorish influences, although interestingly, a lot of things we're seeing, and we'll talk in a moment, are not actually Moorish. Because then we get the Spanish take back power, and Sevilla is basically the capital of the Spanish Empire for about 300 years. And this is at the height of Spanish power. This is when the Spanish are, having huge amounts of wealth coming back from the New World, and they're using that money to sort of build the city, build, amazing structures in the city and throughout Spain. And as Spanish power declines, and the port starts to silt in and is no longer very, useful from a sort of maritime perspective, the Spanish capital moves. I think it moved to Toledo and then eventually ended up in Madrid. And Seville just becomes this backwater for 300 years. Like literally not much going on, sort of a time capsule in some ways, which is why we've got such great preservation of some of the things from that period, because it really didn't have much of note going on through the, 17th, 18th, 19th century, something like that. And it really didn't start to be revitalized until the late 90s, when you see a lot of sort of reinvestment throughout Spain, and a bunch of Spanish cities had sort of their revitalization starting in the 1990s. And so, we're only about 30 years into this becoming a destination for people, which is, I think, really interesting to think about when you're thinking about a 2,000-year plus history. So if you're really interested in the Roman side of things, there are really cool Roman ruins in the region, but not a lot that you're going to see directly within the heart of the city, just because it had all those later influences that came and sort of built on top of a lot of those things. So you can, if you know what you're looking for, you can see some of that. But there is a site called Italica, which I haven't been to, so I grabbed this picture from Wikipedia. But it's like a 10-minute train ride outside of the city. And so if Roman ruins are really your thing and you're interested in seeing sort of different perspectives on Roman architecture, this is definitely an option in the area. I didn't want to skip over that. But within the city, I think the real heart of what you're going to go to Seville to see, and what really explains the rest of the city, is a sort of palace complex called the Real Alcazar. And this is another one of those, it's one of these sites where knowing some of that history is really helpful in understanding what you're seeing, because it is a site that was an actual Moorish fort, and then turned into a sort of Spanish palace. And so you'll be passing through like this, a sort of walled archway, for example, that is of Moorish origin. But then you're entering the palace itself, which is a sort of 14th century, something like that, 13th, 14th, 15th century, I guess, palace that was built in what is called the Mudejar style. Mudejar, Mudejar style, which is essentially this sort of Spanish interpretation of the Moorish style. And this is where you get into that really unique sort of Sevilla architectural style, because it looks sort of Islamic. It looks like things you would expect to see in sort of the Middle East or North Africa. But here it is in Spain, and it's then devoid of sort of the Islamic actual religious significance. And it's purely the sort of Islamic style reinterpreted through a European lens for sort of purposes of art and architecture. And this palace complex, as I say, is reason enough to go to the city. It's a sprawling sort of complex that grew as more and more money was coming back from North and South America. The money was being used to build things like this, these amazing sort of interweaved rooms and different structures and gardens and all of that within the site. Today, at least in the era of COVID, and I don't know if it'll be true for when you go, there's a pretty sort of strict path that you move through a lot of the buildings, but which I only mention because if you've got a printed guide or something from the internet, it may not match up with how you actually move through the structures. But having some sort of interpretive guide, whether that's the audio guide that you can rent at the site or something on your phone, really does help you to understand just some of the things you're going to see. So this is a ceiling that you'll see so this is looking up, obviously, at a domed ceiling with these just incredible intricate patterns, and just pretty mind-blowing for you to be able to move through the structure and see these sorts of sites. You'll also see things that you might think look awful familiar. So if you're a major Game of Thrones fan, you might recognize this from the Real Alcazar, which apparently was used in a season of the Game of Thrones, obviously not taking place in this region, but this is a sort of underground water-filled cistern that sort of is backed against a man-made set of what look like sort of the sand castles you'd make with drippy sand on the beach. So just incredibly dramatic spaces all throughout this palace complex. And you can just wander around. You could easily spend an entire day just exploring the palace and the gardens. And here's just a couple more views on some of those sites at the Real Alcazar. And it was sort of lived in by different kings and different queens for around 250, 300 years before the center of power left. If you are really interested in the sort of royal history and more of the how did royals live elements, there are some tours that actually take you into some of the apartment spaces and other things. And you can explore the sort of behind the scenes of the city a little bit more. And that's the kind of thing where if you just do a little bit of planning ahead, you can get on some of those tours. We saw sort of signs for those things and they look really cool. There's also some sort of art and other things within the space. And I didn't have a great photograph of this, so I'm just going to talk about it for a moment. But in particular, they had some amazing sort of tapestries, sort of wall-sized tapestries that would have maybe at one point been floor coverings, but with just some really interesting different perspectives on the sort of world from the Sevilla perspective. So they have some maps that are essentially, if you were sort of standing in Sevilla looking south and you could see over the horizon, what would you see in the 15th century? And you would sort of see the Mediterranean, and beyond it you would see North Africa, and you would sort of maybe see a little bit inland, and then things get a little fuzzy in terms of their knowledge of what was happening in Northern Africa. And then, off in the other direction, you see into Israel and, in the Middle East. And it was just a really fascinating perspective and really struck me. So really cool complex to explore. I would say, as I say, even if you're not going to do a major stay in Sevilla, even if you're just passing through, or even if you just wanted to do it as a day trip from Madrid, worth the time to get there and check out. And it's important, I think, to note as well, if you're familiar with Granada and the Alhambra, which is the other sort of major sort of site, actual Moorish site in southern Spain, it's important to note that the Alhambra is an actual Moorish structure, and Real Alcazar is a Mudejer style, so built to be Moorish-esque by Spanish folks. So it's important to understand that distinction, and I've seen some articles online that sort of conflate them as if they're both in the same category, and they really aren't. The other major site, sort of at least visually in Seville, is the cathedral, which, if you use enough funky accounting, is the largest or second largest cathedral in Europe, maybe just beyond St. Peter's. that accounting is really based on like total square footage when you include all of our outbuildings and all these things that don't, it's very large, but it's, not, I don't know. It is also, I think, important to note that like it is another one of these structures that is evolved throughout this history of the city. And so if you see the bell tower in this picture on the right, the bottom like 3 feet of that bell tower is, or maybe 3 meters, I guess I would say, is a Roman structure. And then the Moors came in and they built a minaret on top of the Moorish structure. And so that's why you get sort of this very intricate pattern on up through, I think somewhere around here, it's a Moorish tower. And then the Catholics come back in and they lopped off the top of the minaret and built a Catholic bell tower there. And so this one structure, which dates back, the foundations date back 2,000 years, really does capture this entire sort of snapshot of the history of the city. You'll also notice sort of flying buttresses and the sort of overall style of it. So very different from what you would see at like a Renaissance cathedral in Italy. Sort of predates that type of architectural style, which wasn't happening in Spain yet at this point. I think the real, beyond going to the Real Alcazar, which is, as I say, an absolute must-see. The other sort of, sorry, my watch was listening to me. The other real highlight of Sevilla is just wandering, I think, the back lanes. And this is another area where doing a guided tour would be great, or having some sort of, guide or map that is going to take you on a sort of dedicated path, because otherwise you could just end up walking in circles and you'd miss a lot of really cool things. As you'll see from the picture on the left there, it is tight. There's no cars back in the back lanes. There's barely space for 2 people to pass each other going opposite directions. And you can see these are, just normal streets for doing business, hotels, restaurants, shops selling clothing and other things. And it's just delightful to go back and wander and explore. But if you have a bit of a destination in mind, a bit of a path that you're walking, you'll occasionally enter into squares that open up to little parks or little areas in which folks from the community are gathering for their sort of evening conversations. And so sort of knowing what you're looking for as you wander these back alleys is really just the highlight. Part of what you'll find in the back alleys is a whole region of the city that was the sort of Jewish quarter, and then Spanish Inquisition and the sort of upheaval of all of that ends up, kicking all the Jews out. But the sort of tight-knit community of the Jewish culture, of the Jewish community, had led to this whole area that's sort of closed in and very fun to wander around. And you see just sort of amazing brickwork and artwork and other things that are sort of baked into the structure of the city. So if you wander a little bit further outside of just that core sort of really ancient part of the city, you're going to come across the river. As I said, it's a major river that cuts through the city. You can see it's quite sizable. Today, I think it's only navigable from the from the Atlantic up until Seville. But at one point, the river you could be navigated as far as Cordoba, which is quite a ways away from this. And you'll see there's all kinds of sort of, both cruising ships in the background, sort of pirate ship things for different types of events. And sort of anytime you're walking across the river, day or night, you're going to see people out rowing in, and I don't know my different types of boats, but sort of scull and crew and kayaks and paddle boards and all kinds of things. It's a river that is super active for folks doing recreation these days. And that's something that's actually super accessible to tourists. So you can either do a river cruise, which might have food and entertainment and just take you up and down the river. But you can also go and rent kayaks or rent some of these other boats and explore the city from the river, which is a really fun way to get out and explore, and could be a nice thing to do on a beautiful day. You'll see more serious groups that are out actually training on the river as well, and they have dedicated lanes set up sort of with buoys and things for their different types of races and competitions. So really cool part of the town. If you cross the river, if you cross from the sort of historic part across the river, you get into what's called the Triana neighborhood. And the Triana neighborhood, in the sort of when Seville was sort of at its lowest, maybe in the 19th century, the one thing that was going on in Seville was in the Triana neighborhood, it became a really powerhouse for tile manufacture. And so you see throughout the city, you see amazing tile work, both in buildings and in restaurants and all over. And they have both lots and lots to this day, lots and lots of stores that are selling different types of tile that are made in Seville. And they also have a great museum, which is the structure on the left, that sort of takes you through the history of tile making and ceramics work within the city. And there's evidence of sort of tile working going back to Roman times, just owing to the types of materials that were available in the region that were very appropriate for this type of manufacture. And the industry stayed active in like full force up until maybe the latter half of the 20th century. So the last of the sort of major tile factories that were doing sort of industrial scale production in the Triana neighborhood, they didn't close until the 1960s, 1970s. The last of those sort of closed up. And today what you have are some more of the just small scale artisanal manufacturers making decorative pieces that might be a special inset into a larger piece of tile work or something like that, but not a lot of industrial scale production. So there's that neighborhood is also where you'd find more of the sort of artsy vibes. So you'll find galleries, different types of arts events, different types of shopping and markets and other things over in the Triana neighborhood. So a little bit more modern, more of that industrial vibe, but super accessible and nice as well. Just to return to the city map itself very briefly, the other area I wanted to draw your attention to is the Parque de Maria Luisa. If you're familiar with sort of Spanish culture or Southern European culture in general, you know that there's a tradition in most countries in the area or in the region to have some sort of evening stroll, the paseo or the passeggiata, or this idea of like, work's done, but we're Spanish, so we're not going to eat dinner until like 9 p.m. And so we need to like do something in the interim. And the day is finally cooling off a little bit and we want to get out and socialize. And so there's this idea that we're just all going to get out and go for a walk and chat and, maybe have a snack or a drink. But Parque de Maria Luisa is one of those destinations that a lot of folks are going to go to at the end of their workday. It's just a massive park that's full of really, interesting bits of architecture, some sort of major important sort of buildings that were built towards the end of the most powerful times of the Spanish Empire, and some more modern buildings as well. But it's one of these destinations just to wander down to in the evening and do some people watching, maybe have an ice cream and just go for a walk. But it's a really cool place. Just wanted to share a little bit more about some of the just pictures of the city to give you a sense of it. So on the left, this is near the Airbnb we were staying in, which was, maybe a 10-minute walk north of the Real Alcazar, maybe not even that far. But you see just, small winding streets, even the streets that cars can pass. There are no sort of major thoroughfares here. The real heart of the city around the Real Alcazar and the cathedral is totally car-free at this point. But very, very walkable city, a city to just wander around. This picture on the left was taken maybe around 8 a.m. And you will notice there are not a lot of people out because Spanish folks sleep later and stay up later, which is a little tough for those of us who are maybe jet lagged. And then on the right here, Kat is modeling with a breakfast sandwich at our neighborhood bar. One of the great things about going to a city that's not completely overrun with tourists is that, if you're staying, like we were staying, even, in the heart of the city, our neighborhood bar is full of just neighborhood folks. And so when we would go in there in the morning before I went off to my conference and Kat went off to work for the day, everyone's there just catching up on the news of the day, talking about politics, talking about sports. And they were all just super kind to us and welcoming. And, we had our delicious breakfast bocadillo sandwiches with, beautiful thin sliced jamon and butter and cheese and all kinds of delicious things each morning at our neighborhood bar, which was just down the stairs basically from our Airbnb. Again, just one of the nice things about picking a city that isn't fully oriented around tourist traffic is that you can have those experiences which feel a little more authentic, I would say. So that gives you some vibe about the types of things you'll do in Sevilla. So, hitting a couple of the major sites, but really I would say just doing a lot of wandering. There aren't a lot of other major museums you're going to go to. There are some other sort of historic houses and things. So if seeing sort of architecture is really something you're into and you like to see sort of interior spaces, there's great options. But I think it's just a beautiful city to be in, to exist in, and to just relax in, especially, when you can just have these beautiful evenings out strolling with regular folks who are also just enjoying themselves. But I want to dedicate a little bit of specific conversation to the food side of things, because that is another real highlight of the city for me. We did one of the sort of tapas tours, which I think is a really nice way to wrap your head around how to eat tapas. So for those who don't know, tapas is just this idea of going into a bar or a cafe and getting, small plates of delicious things. They might be just, fancy olives. They might be little slices of jamon. They might be more robust sort of baked items or stews or other things. But the idea is you're just snacking on small plates where you have drinks, and you might go to one bar and have some tapas and go to another bar and have some tapas. I would imagine that the concept is probably not foreign to you, but I do know for myself and for I think a lot of Americans traveling in Spain, sort of engaging in tapas culture can be a little bit intimidating. Especially if you're in Barcelona or Madrid, where the bars are just completely packed, and you as an American are sort of patiently waiting for the bartender to acknowledge you, and that's never going to happen. And it can just be a little frustrating. Seville in general is more accessible in that regard, right? You're not going to be in a totally crowded bar where you can't get anyone to pay any attention to you and they're frustrated that you're not speaking Spanish. But doing a tour like this, I think, can help to make you feel a little bit more relaxed when then you go back on your own and want to, order some tapas, because now you sort of understand, oh, we're gonna order, we're gonna get some drinks, we're gonna, grab a table, and here's how we pay, and all of that kind of thing. So I would definitely recommend doing that. I can, if you're actually going to Seville and you want some recommendations, I can send you some links. We also found I'm always a little bit up in the air about group tours versus private tours, because sometimes a group tour can be maybe not the experience that you're looking for. But in a vibe like, or in a situation like this, where you're literally just going to bars to have food and drinks, having a group come together from all around the world to just chat is super, super fun. So we had, a couple different groups of Americans. We had a Dutch guy, a guy from Belgium, a guy from Switzerland, a couple folks from England, our Spanish tour guide who, loves to visit Morocco. And all of us were just sharing stories and talking about our experiences and asking each other questions about our whichever home country's crazy politics. Thank you, UK, for being the more crazy politics of 2022. It's very helpful for us as Americans. There's also sort of other amazing sort of street food or casual food to be found throughout Seville. And so there are a number of these really fantastic indoor markets, which you'll see on the left. These are the types of things that at one point would have been like an actual food hall in the sense of like a market, right? You would go and buy your groceries. And a couple of them within Sevilla have basically been transformed into more like a sort of modern food hall where you've got a bunch of different vendors doing food, and you can grab sort of small plates from lots of different vendors and go. This one on the left in particular is right on the river, so you can go and sit out over the river, or we actually sat inside because they had a band playing and it was really awesome. But these are just some amazing, and toast with artichokes and nuts and other things, and then some beautiful sort of cured ham and other things. And then of course churros on the right. For those who haven't had churros in Spain, what you're going to find, these are a particular type of churro that I'm blanking on the name of. They're much chunkier. You'll find both the skinny churros and the big chunky churros, but they're going to come with a really thick sort of hot chocolate that you're going to be dunking them in. And often nowadays you'll find at a churreria, you'll get your choice of a few different types of chocolate if you want a spicy chocolate or a milk chocolate or a real dark chocolate. But I don't know, churros and chocolate are a real highlight of any trip to Spain for me. And this was at a Cuca Churro, as you can see in the background, which is a sort of chain churro place, but we also had some amazing local churros as well. Not unique to Seville, but definitely worth seeking out. You'll also, of course, find amazing baked goods. We had a few different rounds of really fantastic baked goods from different bakeries within Seville. Again, what you would expect from any cool European city. And lastly, I would say, as I sort of said at the beginning, we had just some absolutely outstanding dinners at restaurants that would be far too fancy for us to go to routinely in the US, where you're ordering multiple courses of delicious items. These are some sort of roasted leeks with all kinds of delicious things inside and on a base of tomatoes and other things. And rarely paying more than $50 for a meal for two people with multiple courses and dessert and drinks and all of that. And so I was shocked at how affordable really nice dining was in Seville. And on the right, you can see this is a lunch that Kat had while I was at a conference. And again, just finding sort of beautiful, fresh food that is not going to leave you feeling bad about yourself, just bringing in lots of veg, beautifully done. That's sort of the vibe across everywhere we went. I didn't have any meals throughout our whole time in the city where I left, just feeling like I was waddling out of the place. You feel like you've done good by your body. So highly recommended as a food destination. Again, I don't think there's a lot of food that you would find in Seville that you wouldn't find anywhere else in Spain. But if you're interested in Spanish cuisine, it is a sort of nice between Madrid or Barcelona, which are these massive, overwhelming cities that, of course, have amazing dining, and then sort of more rural Spain, like even a Granada, which is maybe a tenth the size of Seville. You're just not going to find the diversity of options. And so I think Seville is a really nice intersection of those things. And you get all of the amazing food coming in from the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, the amazing fish and seafood. So highly recommended with all of those things in mind. So logistics. What do we need to know about our trip to Seville? Just don't go in the summer. Absolutely. Don't go in the summer. We were there in November. It was early November. It was like 80 every day and really sunny. In the way that you just feel like you're close to the sun, it's aggressively sunny. I cannot imagine how hot it must be in the summer. You get some sense of that because even in the 15th century, the 14th century, when they're building the Real Alcazar, most of the reason they have all of these interior gardens and pools and really thick walls was they were trying to escape the heat. Newsflash, it's gotten a lot hotter since then. And so southern Spain in the summer these days, you're going to be routinely having temperatures over 100 degrees. You're not going to find the sort of aggressive air conditioning you would find in the American South, for example. So I think it's a really great destination, though, to think about in sort of, late fall, early winter, like when we went, sort of November, getting into March and April, sort of before the rush of tourist season. But even if you were to go as a winter destination, I checked today and it's 65. And it's -5 here. So that's a pretty good delta. If you want to get out of Minnesota, fly to Spain and go spend a week in Seville, like you're probably going to be at least 60, 70 degrees warmer than you are back home. So just don't go in the summer. If you want to get there, I would say if your destination is specifically Seville, you're going to want to fly into Madrid or Barcelona and take the train. Unfortunately, the train connections from like somewhere like Lisbon aren't great. You're probably going to end up basically going to Madrid and then going to Seville, or taking very slow trains in a sort of circuitous route, even though if you were to look at the map, they're relatively close together. There's not great international high-speed rail options. As I said, it would also be a great option to put together as part of a driving tour of the Iberian Peninsula. The roads throughout Spain and Portugal are fantastic. You shouldn't feel intimidated at all by driving in the region. So, you could put together a really amazing trip, sort of flying into Madrid, driving down to Porto in Portugal, then down along the coast to Lisbon, and then come across to Seville, and then go all the way up through like Valencia and into Barcelona and fly home out of Barcelona. Like, that would be a great way to spend a month in Spain if you're so inclined to spend a month in Spain. Definitely you're going to want to stay somewhere in the historic center, and that's going to mean either doing an Airbnb or looking at a very small hotel in general. There's really not a lot of large, and certainly not a lot of large Western hotels in the center of the city. So you're going to want to go on your like booking.com and look for some of these places that are going to be maybe 10 rooms within the center of the city, or look at some of the Airbnb options. And then definitely think about day trips or even overnight trips. So if you are, for example, interested in visiting Morocco, putting together an overnight trip where you would leave Spain, go down to the coast, take a ferry across to Morocco, and do maybe a whole day or a day and a night in Morocco, and then come back. There are tour agencies that make that really easy if you don't want to figure it out yourself. But it's also something that if you do just a little bit of research online and figure out when the ferry schedules are and all of that, it's a very accessible trip and can be a really great way to sort of maybe take your first steps into North Africa before planning a bigger trip into that region. You're gonna have to work on staying out late, which I will admit I am not great at. I am definitely the kind of person who's happier to go to bed early and get up early. But do your best. You're not going to eat until after 8. Just accept that and plan your day around that. Have snacks. If you know a little bit of Spanish, that definitely helps. No one's going to be sort of rude to you for not knowing Spanish, but you're not in a place that is so sort of multinational and tourist focused like in a Madrid. So you're not going to find as many folks who speak English in addition to Spanish. Book your tickets to the Real Alcazar in advance. This isn't the kind of thing where you need to book them like months in advance, but you don't want to end up in the ticket line because it's very lengthy, and they only do timed admissions with a specific ticket. So make sure you go online and book that ticket in advance. There's really nothing else in the city that you need to book in advance or have tickets in advance for. Certainly if you're going to be there, not during the crush of tourists during summer travel season, which you shouldn't be going in the summer anyways. And it's also one of these cities where different types of local activities and events are very accessible to tourists. So, maybe a week or two in advance of your visit, just go online and do some looking around for different events calendars and see what you might be able to find that might be happening. So for us, there was a local Christmas market that was just getting going around the cathedral, and that was fun to wander around. And we were just getting there at the tail end of a big book festival. And there's other sorts of things where if you just do a little bit of research in advance, you can get plugged in, and that can make it easier to make those sort of local connections. So that is what I had to share about Seville or Sevilla. Hope that it makes you feel like it might be the kind of place you'd like to go. As I say, I think it's just a really nice destination, especially if you are maybe not looking for the intensity of a major, metropolis like Madrid or Barcelona, but you still want to have access to some of the really fun parts of Spanish culture in terms of food and lifestyle and getting plugged into just maybe a different perspective on some of that European history that is pretty different from what you might find in other parts of Europe. So next month, we're going to at least do one more of these because I got nudged into putting together why should I visit Iceland conversation, and doing it in January seems, I guess, apropos. So next month, we're going to talk about Iceland and how you might put together a trip that takes you out of the Golden Triangle, exploring a little bit more, getting away from the tourist crowds, like this photograph of me walking across a glacier in Iceland. And so now I'll flip over and see what questions you might have. Here's a question about sort of putting together a Spanish itinerary and what other places you might look at. I think there's, I certainly haven't been to everywhere in Spain, but Spain is a large country, and it is really, really diverse in terms of the types of landscapes and the types of experiences you can have. And so what I would say is, do a little bit of thinking about what types of activities you're really interested in. If there's particular sort of types of hiking or rock climbing or other types of adventure sports or other things you might want to engage in, because those can be great ways to anchor yourself to a region of Spain, because Spain sort of has mountains and deserts and coasts and all sorts of things that you can partake in. I'm partial to the north of Spain and some of the long distance hiking routes that are part of the Camino de Santiago. And so that would be going up to cities like Leon. And that's, you get up there, that's totally different history. That's the Knights Templar and sort of Catholics coming through and fighting the Moors, but then sort of running a very different sort of religious fervor up in the north. You're realistically going to be flying in or out of Madrid or Barcelona, because those are really the two airports that you're going to have connections from the US at least. And so putting together a sort of open jaw trip where you start in one and end in the other, if you really want to see all of Spain or a good chunk of Spain, makes a lot of sense. And so beyond that, I'd say just, think about, are you more interested in, Mediterranean Riviera type lifestyle, where you might look at, somewhere along the Mediterranean coast down from Barcelona, or do you want to get into the mountains and do hiking, or get up to the north where it's a little more rough and poor and sort of almost starts to get into some more of that Gaelic sort of Galician culture. So yeah, I think you can have any type of awesome experience in Spain. Another question about food in Seville. You will definitely find a lot of amazing seafood and fish. And that's super accessible on a lot of menus and a part of a lot of tapas. There's also a lot of cured fish in Spanish cuisine, so you'll find that as well. But yeah, definitely we had some really nice fish dishes at some of the restaurants we went to. And then, of course, you have lots and lots of cured meat, the jamon serrano and all of the things they do with pork products, and then lots of, obviously, fresh pork and things as well. But I would say, I think the highlight of Spanish cuisine in general for me is just all of the amazing things they do with the fresh vegetables, because it's such a lush region for growing, such a long growing season that even into November, they're getting a lot of fresh, locally grown produce, and they're adapting menus to fit that. But you get, all kinds of more tropical fruits and vegetables, along with sort of a lot of sort of staple items as well. So I don't know, it's I think a really, really diverse cuisine. I think far more diverse than the types of food you'd find even in Italy, because you've got, more of that North African flavor and some of the, things they do, like with some of their rice dishes and things. And you get all the seafood and the cured meats and this sort of big north-south spread in terms of the growing season as well. So with that in mind, I'll say thanks everyone for joining. So nice to have you. I hope everyone has a really nice holiday. Everyone who is traveling in the Midwest, I hope makes smart decisions and stays safe. and hunkers down. I was indexing to make sure we've got plenty of coffee on hand if we're stuck in the house for a few days, and we do indeed. But you've got another couple hours here before the snow starts in Minnesota, so make your last grocery runs, and stay safe. And we'll see you all in a month. Thanks, y'all.